Hello, my name is Gabrielle Moore. I am here to give a brief presentation on my worldview of culture and conflict and how it started, how it developed over time to bring me where I'm at today. So, the best visual because I'm a visual learner, the best visual I could come up with is like a concentric circle. And I really like the idea of the mosaic because for me, that's really what it has been. My worldview started very small. So, at the very center of this mosaic circle, um, because my worldview was very limited growing up, but then it developed over time. So I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho. I'm a third generation Idahoan. And when I say I was born in Boise, that's a pretty small little circle on this map, but really, um, I was born in this part of Boise. So, like, this was my mother's comfort zone. So it was my comfort zone. In fact, I'm being pretty generous here. Um, we stayed in the same area. This is where I grew up. Was in the same house all my years until I turned 18. And my worldview was very limited to the people around me. I spent my summers in Idaho City, which um, it was even a more limited worldview uh, with my relatives up there. So it was very white, it was very westernized, very um, middle class, lower middle class people around me. I grew up in poverty basically, so we didn't travel. I had no idea that really a world existed outside of this other than in books and movies that I saw. So growing up, I was a child of a single parent. She was raised in a very toxic home life, domestic violence situation. My mother was already pretty old, so her parents were born in the 1800s, and a lot of really bad toxic behaviors were observed and learned by her. And then, in response to those childhood traumas, she did not learn how to deal with conflict. So when she had me, she was able to either get really angry and rage about something, or her preference was to just go to the silent treatment. And obviously, neither of which are healthy. So I did not learn how to deal with conflict well growing up. I joined debate as a high schooler, and that really did help. But my mother she swept it under the rug. She would keep me in a silent or give me the silent treatment for a day or two or even a week or two, but it would slowly stop and there was just no discussion about it. So we never talked about anything, we never worked anything through, still to this day. So unfortunately, I had to undo that. But as I moved out of my mom's house and into my husband's home, I got married very young, at 20 years old. I got married, and then my husband was in the Navy. And so at 20 years old, having never really left Boise, in fact, when I was 16, my boyfriend at the time, now my husband, he actually drove me across the Idaho state line into Ontario, Oregon, just so I could say I had been to another state. So that's how limited my worldview was, unfortunately. But when he was in the Navy, I moved with him down to San Diego, California. So my entire world changed overnight. And I was in absolute overwhelmed terror at living in such a big city. I had no idea what I was getting into. And once I got there, I cried every night for weeks, wanting to go home. It was the best thing that ever happened to us. I highly recommend moving away from parents when you first get married. But I learned so much there. We met people from all over the country, even the world, really. So and of course, the culture down there is so much different, so much more diverse, so much more cultured. Um, and I went to work for a clothing manufacturer. And it was owned by a large Jewish family. I had never met Jewish people before, so that was interesting too. So there was a lot of learning that went on and a lot of growth during that time. When we moved home, we had children. That sort of, again, my circles increased a little bit. I did play dates and went to other people's homes and just learned that other people live differently. When my kids were started in school, I went back to work and I worked in healthcare for many years. That in and of itself is a different kind of a culture because it's focused on disease and pain and health seeking. So a lot of the people that I dealt with in my particular job were a little bit older, but that was really also a really interesting culture where you start to see how people live their lives and what really matters to them. And then when my kids were grown and they did found their own way and went on to college or whatever, I went back to school, and that was a whole different culture. The academic culture is kind of where I think I should have been this whole time, but I never made room in my life for me until my kids were taken care of. But being a part of the academic culture has been really rewarding, and another season of eye-opening experiences, growth opportunities, and new uh, cultures to learn about. So, unlearning conflict skills that I learned as a youth has been one of the most challenging things I've taken on. And I knew it was something really important, especially when I became a manager, that I needed to learn how, not only to how to better use conflict skills at work, how to use them at home, and then how to teach them to my children, to my employees. Uh, this required a lot of mistakes. Um, I learned by doing a lot of times because I didn't have anybody teaching me how to do this until I got to school, of course, but I never had a supervisor that said, let me mentor you in conflict skills. So it took a lot of time. This was a growth that came slow and painful over time. I needed to want it. I knew that it was something I needed, especially when I had problems with employees. It was really important to me to learn how to cope with those better so that I could avoid some of the mistakes I made altogether in the future. Um, Emotional wisdom, I'd like to think that when I was 20 years old that I knew a lot, but I didn't. I was ignorant and naive. And a lot of what I've learned has just come from the school of hard knocks. I've just had to learn how to be a person by interacting with lots of different people. And I practiced. I used to avoid conflict at all costs. Now, over the last, I don't know, 5 or so years, I have purposefully seen an opportunity to enter into conflict, not necessarily a fight, but just conflict. And I have purposely walked into that with my eyes open, knowing that I need to practice healthy skills, remember what I've learned, remember to be curious, all that. So I've gotten so much better at it now that I do it. So just the practicing, learning by doing. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to my little spiel about how my life of concentric circles has and mosaic pieces have brought me to where I am today. It's been fun.